Today's talk is titled, Who is the Creator? And will be presented by Nick Filzen. Both of Nick's parents were professional musicians and music educators. So Nick was surrounded by music throughout his life, and it shows in your beautiful voice, Nick. This was certainly a factor for him to choose a career in and around classical music, until he followed the call to become a UU minister. After Nick finished graduate school at Manhattan School of Music, where he studied opera, he performed as a professional singer for a short time, but spent most of his time working in art administration. He first worked as an opera artist manager in New York. Then, from 2013 until May of 2017, he managed operations for the Florida Orchestra. Nick left the orchestra to pursue his Master of Divinity degree at Meadville Lombard Theological School, where he graduated in May. He also recently completed his ministerial internship at the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara in June. As a UU ministerial candidate, Nick will see the Ministerial Fellowship Committee in early October. While he studies for that upcoming important interview, he spends a lot of time with his wife and 2 daughters at home during the pandemic, helping his girls with virtual school until they can safely return to the classroom. Welcome, Nick.
When I started writing this sermon, this reflection, I hadn't planned on getting going just yet. My plan that day was to do a fair amount of reading for my MFC interview, the final piece of the official ministerial formation process before I can become ordained. Now, I still have a lot of reading to do for this monumental personal moment in early October, as Sue said, and I'm feeling the pressure to get it done in time. And as I was reading a reflection in one of the required books called Everyday Spiritual Practice, my immediate external need to keep reading was overcome by an immediate and deep internal need to start writing. Or was it internal? I was reading the reflection in the book written by Reverend Lori Bushbaum about the seemingly simple process of quilting as a spiritual practice, when I just needed to grab my computer to get this bursting at the seams, so to speak, inspiration down on paper. And as I began writing, I couldn't get this question out of my mind. Is it really me creating this sermon? And if not, then who? Here are Reverend Bushbaum's words that so intensely resonated with what was already on my heart. She says, "Art is not so much what we make, but how we relate to the world. Not a noun, but a verb. This puts art back in the position to be claimed by the many. Quilting has been a way for me to use a particular discipline as a means of discovering that it is not the art creation itself that matters so much, but what the process of creation teaches. The spiritual discipline of quilting has taught me the rhythms of the creation process. Many of my quilt pieces were started, partially completed, only then to spend 2 or 3 years on a shelf, waiting for the vision to reappear or clarify. When the inspiration comes, it sometimes comes with such dazzling, simple clarity that I can only say a quiet thank you for this amazing grace." Now, if I'm in conversation with Reverend Bushbaum here, the phrase claimed by the many perhaps means something a little different to me than what she intended. Each process can't merely be claimed by just one. It can also be claimed by everyone in a metaphorical and real sense. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm also moved by the last sentence. I can only say a quiet thank you for this amazing grace. I, too, offer my gratitude when the muse arrives, but to whom do I say thank you? certainly to Reverend Bushbaum for her wisdom, but the inspiration didn't just come from her. I also did the work creating this sermon. And, and how did she and I get connected? I thank the members of the MFC for asking me to read this book. But how did the book get created? Obviously, a lot of folks influenced this creating moment. So many threads to connect. Like I did by including Reverend Bushbaum's words, many 20th and 21st century composers of music in the West directly borrow from the musical ancestors to enhance their own works. Not to say that this homily is anywhere near the brilliant musical compositions of folks like Stravinsky or Prokofiev. Now, there was even a whole period of music referred to as neoclassical, where composers like the two guys I just mentioned intentionally played with the melodies and styles of earlier masters to make something seemingly new. Similarly, modern DJs are masterful at seamlessly weaving together different songs or making remixes of those songs to, again, create something new. An apparent instantaneous sound quilt creation. As these new creations happen, I return to my previous line of questions. Who was actually creating? The original composer alone? The modern musician creating the new thing by themselves? Someone or something else entirely? I'm going to get extra heady just for a second here. Bear with me. I'll take the Band-Aid off quickly, I promise. There's a type of theology that is directly tied to early 20th century Unitarian history called process theology, created and refined, at least initially, by Alfred North Whitehead and Henry Wyman. They argue in a few more words than I'm going to use here that creation is not fixed. It is always emerging, moment to moment. And for them, God is actively involved in this, well, you guessed it, probably, process. In this process, our communities, the world, even each of us as individual creatures are constantly becoming, based on all the direct and indirect interactions and experiences we've had now and in the past. Everything, every body is literally created by, with, and through every other body forever, perpetually creating new life. And by life, I don't just mean when a baby is born, an event which literally embodies this creative process. Life itself is embodied art of the most divine nature, constantly emerging. As religious naturalist Dr. Ursula Goodenough suggests, nature herself is constantly emerging. Dr. Goodenough uses the Latin phrase natura naturans, or in English, nature naturing. And what this means is nature becoming nature by being nature in an endless process. Nature is nature by doing nature. I think the Haudenosaunee creation story gift shared earlier is a lovely metaphor for this process. Unlike in some other creation stories, the process of creation is shared among all creatures in the animal kingdom. I think this is both more like reality and, frankly, a healthier mythology out of which to make meaning in our lives than, say, the hegemonic or rather dominant creation narrative from Hebrew and Christian scripture. I mentioned earlier that in a real sense, each process, each piece of art can't merely be claimed by just one. It can also be claimed by everyone, by everything, in fact. Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh says, quote, "If you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in the sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist." If we look into the sheet of paper even more deeply, we can see that the sunshine in it. Without sunshine, the forest cannot grow. In fact, nothing can grow without sunshine. Looking even more deeply, we can see ourselves in this sheet of paper too. This is not difficult to see because when we look at a sheet of paper, it is part of our perception. Your mind is here, and mine is also. Everything coexists with and co-creates this sheet of paper. Suppose we tried to return one of the elements to its source. Suppose we return the sunshine to the sun. Do you think that this sheet of paper will be possible? No. If we return each of the non-paper elements to their sources, then there could be no paper at all. As thin as this sheet of paper is, it contains everything in the universe in it. Okay, I promised I wouldn't dwell in the heady too long. UU ethicist Dr. Sharon Welch, who is a former dean at Meadville, is notorious for loving jazz. She just adores it. When she retired, the student body gave her season passes to jazz performances in Chicago. She attends these jazz performances regularly and often uses it as a metaphor in her teaching, both the aesthetics of it and the philosophy of it. A metaphor that really resonates with me too. Just like with classical music, jazz music doesn't become music until musicians transfer it from the page to an audible art form. This itself is another beautiful manifestation of co-creation. Yet, jazz also has this built-in component of improvisation, creation on the fly. Or is it? Importantly, when a jazz trumpeter like, say, Wynton Marsalis improvises, he's not simply making up unrelated notes in a vacuum. He's doing it in relation to the pre-specified chords, the notes he played previously, and the other artists with whom he's creating. And of course, the audience hearing the performance plays a role too. This is powerful and compelling allegory and theology for how life itself is constantly becoming, constantly being created, co-created, and recreated in relationship to others, now and in the past. As we travel along this road of perpetual creation, I don't mean to suggest that we forget our old selves and our old stories or the experiences we've had or our ancestors. I don't mean that we shouldn't hold dear that and those out of whom we've emerged. Quite the contrary. Those stories, experiences, and our ancestors are always going to be a part of us. They're part of us right now. They are the tapestry of our being. E.C. Barnwell's great hymn tells us we are our grandmother's prayers, we are our grandfather's dreamings, we are the breath of our ancestors, we are the spirit of God. I say we are both connected to our past and everything else, and free from our past and everything else. We are neither dependent nor independent. We are interdependent. All the new each of us create is grounded by all of what our ancestors did and experienced. And we have the responsibility to be free from that. As the line in Spirit of Life goes, roots hold me close, wings set me free. This reflection itself is a metaphor for this ongoing relational process of creation. Honestly, this is the third time I've shared a version of it, and like me, it's changed along the way as it's been influenced by different people in different contexts. On the surface alone, it's about 5 minutes longer than the original because in this context, people have an expectation of a certain sermon length. I'm in a co-creating process with you all. Since I'm not the creator alone and creation is a relational process, the chance to revise my thoughts is an excellent opportunity to live into this notion of the divine being a process of shared creation. And it's not just the sermon that's changed each service. There's also different music given shape by different artists. Though the readings are also similar, different voices are reading them with a different inflection and nuance. And of course, the people experiencing it are different with their own unique perspectives and worldviews, influenced by an endless list of creating moments. As Thich Nhat Hanh said about paper, this sermon too is part of our perception. Your mind is here, and mine is also. Listening itself has an impact on creation, especially when it comes to being with somebody who's in pain. Listening can create healing and wholeness. Just like with jazz, sure, I'm the soloist today, but I'm creating in relation to the existing lyrics, the people with whom I'm in relation, the different preceding structure of the song that is this service, and the audience, the congregation. And like jazz, even when something is performed over and over, a new version of itself is constantly emerging. Acknowledging this, living into it, embodying a new creation story every moment, opens so much faithful opportunity to develop ourselves and to develop the world out of which we emerge. Since I mentioned developing the world, it's necessary to briefly mention how this theology intersects with justice. When creating justice, it's imperative that there's an awareness and intentionality about which voices, bodies, and experiences are privileged in the process of creation, and whose voices, bodies, and experiences are most impacted by what and how we create. And since it's not just humans with whom we're quilted, it's also important to know how we're impacting nature herself. This may be you heresy here, but I don't believe the universe bends toward justice, at least not inherently, not without intentional action at the most vulnerable connection points of our interdependent web. Without deliberate shared divine action, the whole web could break apart. Since there's no inherent bend toward justice, at least in my mind, we as individuals and as a community need to intentionally send it in that direction. We create the situation in which justice can flourish and oppression can wither. We have the ability and responsibility to give life the shape of justice. In practice, this takes an awareness of our social location and systemic privilege, so those of us with oversized power don't unknowingly reinforce, recreate hegemonic culture, recreate domination. My faith demands I keep that relational creativity at the forefront of my ministry and gives me hope that together, if we answer that divine call, we can create justice, we can create peace, we can create beloved community. So in answer to the kind of big lingering question here, is God the creator? Yes. And yet, I personally don't think God is a singular conscious father figure intentionally doing any concrete actions alone. Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, is the creative verb form of the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part, acting with us in her own best interest, altogether breathing, grieving, creating, on small scales and large. And the beautiful thing about this theology is that it doesn't take any agency away from us, each of us as individuals. Each of us are the stitching of this ever-emerging quilt of creation. Sure, this means we can impact it for the bad, yet we also have the power to add some good. The way we're involved in this process matters in a powerful way. So as we go out into this world, lend your creativity to beauty, to justice, to life. Do when the Spirit says do, and then take a moment to say thank you for this amazing grace.
Thank you, Nick. I love the idea of nature being nature being nature. Thank you. That was wonderful. Normally at this time, we receive offerings from our congregants. However, due to the virtual format of this service, we invite you to make your offering in one of the methods shown on the slideshow. These methods will also be posted in the newsletter and on the UUCC website itself. Please keep in mind that our congregation is entirely self-governed by the democratic process. One of the privileges of our free church tradition is to provide all of the financial support for our many ministries from among ourselves. Generosity, therefore, is one of the spiritual values we recognize as central to our personal and institutional well-being. You are invited to participate in the blessing by giving, by sending us an offering. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. That was wonderful. Thank you. Let us now sing the doxology.
From all that dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land, by every tongue.
Please join us in singing the closing hymn, When the Spirit Says Do, number 1024.
Oh, I want you to let your little child out and play and sing and dance and laugh and shout. You got to do when the Spirit says do. You got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you got to do, oh Lord, you got to do when the Spirit says do. Spirit says do, 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 Spirit says do. You got to sing when the Spirit says sing. You got to sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you got to sing, oh Lord. You got to sing when the Spirit says sing. Spirit says sing, Spirit says sing, Spirit says sing, Spirit
here in the sanctuary, but we sure do have a good time. Thank you, Mary.
Thank
It's
you.
always wonderful. Now let's recite the valediction. The flame of this chalice will no longer burn today, but the light of the flame within our hearts continues to shine brightly, illuminating the love felt in our community. After the benediction, please move your arrow to the top right of your screen and click the gallery view button. As a reminder, Nick invites you to stay for a question and comment session directly after today's services. Nick will give the benediction.
His words are adapted from the sermon Breath of Life by the Reverend Beth Chronister. The mysterious spirit of life, justice, and creation, ever emerging interdependent web of existence, Ruach Elohim, blows over, around, against, and within, changing and moving landscapes and possibilities, birthing anew life potentials in this never-ending process of creation, bringing new light and new hope to the formless voids and shadowy depths. May we all learn to lean into the winds of changes as co-creators of our lives and our world. Blessed be.